Hello, and thank you for joining me today for managing multiple healthcare facilities. Our topic will be automation. My name is Linda Pinion, and I'll be your host. As part of our agenda, we'll start out today by looking at how facilities, entities, and departments are managing spend. This will take us to looking at a more detailed view of automating the procure-to-pay process. Along the way, we'll look at reporting and monitoring this information via our role-based dashboards. And then we'll take a look at the solution and learn a little bit more about how healthcare organizations are able to manage spend. We'll finish up with some resources and some key takeaways. One of the topics that we typically hear from healthcare organizations is help us understand how we are spending and where we are spending. Being able to control spend and cost is top of list for every business or organization in the world today. And in the healthcare world, because typically there are multiple facilities, there are multiple people involved, this can be a detailed process to get your head around. So what I want to share with you here on this very busy workflow approval screen is the fact that you have choices as to how you define and design spend management in Sage Intacct. If we start at the top of this round circle here, we'll see that we're really starting out in accounts payable. And for many of you, most of what you buy is through an accounts payable transaction. By that, I mean that you are calling up a vendor, ordering supplies, they are shipping those supplies to you and sending you an invoice. You're not going through a formal purchase order process. However, part of what you want to do is to make sure that even though that is a purchase where you just picked up the phone and called the vendor, you want to make sure that someone's looking at that before it gets paid, to make sure that it's coded correctly, to make sure that the pricing is correct, just to have that set of eyes on that transaction. So accounts payable bill approval is the first step that can be accomplished here. And it's all based on approval policies that you define when you implement accounts payable. Part of that may be an individual approval. It may be based on a dollar amount. And then we move to the second bullet, and that is around purchasing approval. So for some organizations, they are doing most of what they do through a formal issue of a purchase order. And that may, in fact, start with a purchase requisition. So a purchase requisition gets entered, and then that gets looked at, approved, and then converted or turned into a purchase order before it's sent to the vendor. Again, a more formal process. Perhaps you use purchase orders for some things, but again, most everything that you're doing is straight through accounts payable. If you are issuing purchase orders, then you can certainly continue to do that in Sage Intacct. And part of that configuration is to define what that workflow looks like in the way of approvals. And again, that might be based on a person looking at that transaction. It might be based on a dollar amount. So either way, you have the ability to look at that purchase order or requisition before it gets into the workflow. Many people, again, let me just emphasize, many people are using both accounts payable and purchasing. to do all of their types of buying for their organization. On top of that, there is another bullet, which is spend management. And spend management is a more defined and prescriptive way for you to control that spend. And that application works in both accounts payable and it works in purchasing. And the background to that is at transaction time, we're going to look at some configuration that you've set up around budgeting, and we're going to identify in a spend management window exactly where you are. So we're going to look at your budget, we're going to look at what you've already spent, and then we're going to do the math to see if you have enough money in the budget to make this purchase. Based on configuration, it will either be something that stops you and will not let you proceed, or it will be a warning, and that warning will advise you that you are putting yourself in an area where you do not have enough money to cover this particular purchase. All of this is identified to the budget administrator through notification, and there's a full audit trail to all of those transactions. So at its core, what we're doing here is we are helping you by way of two different areas, whether it's accounts payable or your purchasing team. And then if you need that advanced, more prescriptive model of controlling spend, we're applying what we call spend management. Now, in reality, if we move to the fourth bullet, many people are using a combination. I call it the hybrid model. And this allows you to utilize accounts payable and purchasing and to apply that spend management when you need that advanced control. So again, this is all part of Sage Intacct's native solution. It's however you choose to use it, what works best in your organization. I will tell you that controlling spend and cost is top of mind for everyone. And so this model is something that I wanted to lay out to you first before we move any further in our topic today. Now, one of the things that we also want to help you with is automating the process. So part of it is obviously controlling that spend. However, we want to make sure that you're efficient in your day-to-day activities. And what you're looking at here is what we call a process map. You'll see this in a few moments in the software. It really outlines pictorially what happens in a process, one that is automated, one that eliminates you being required to enter information multiple times. It gives you that path, and we'll furnish you with the best business practice when you initially start out. However, you will have the ability to change that process based on how you choose to use the solution. We'll also be able to address how you want to pay for these bills. So whether you want to use centralized or decentralized payment processing, if you're managing multiple healthcare facilities, each facility may pay their own bills, or you may pay that out of your corporate office. So you may be doing centralized payment processing. You may be doing centralized purchasing. It really is flexible enough for you to do this whichever way you choose. However, we're going to make it as streamlined as possible. We're going to eliminate you having to enter data multiple times. And more importantly, we're going to give you that visibility that you need to know what's being paid and where it's being paid from. In fact, we have the ability to set up what we call inter-entity. So in the case of paying AP bills, it could be in these multiple facilities that most of the time they pay their own bills out of their own bank. On occasion, it may be that corporate or another entity pays a bill on behalf of one of your facilities. When that happens, and it does occasionally, sometimes it's more often than not, if you're not automating that process, then you're trying to capture that perhaps in a spreadsheet, and you're making journal entries to transact and correct those payments that have gone across entities. In Sage Intacct, we'll ask you to set up a relationship between those entities and point to specific accounts that we can use to create what we call the due tos and due froms. We will do this automatically, so you don't have to keep track of it on a spreadsheet. And speaking of payment processing, a couple of other points to remember here as we go along. You have the ability to set up your payments, your AP bills to pay multiple different ways. So if you want to print these checks on plain paper, you can certainly do that. You can have pre-printed forms and print them on those pre-printed checks as well. You can also set up filtering options in bill pay so that you can very quickly determine who needs to be paid and not miss any of those terms discounts. You also can utilize ACH if that's a path that you've taken to get your bills paid. So certainly you can utilize ACH, a little bit of setup on the vendor side, a little setup in the cash management application, and then those payments will be made electronically by your bank. There's also a way for you to, in that bill pay, filter out and determine if you're paying for one entity or paying across entities. Be able to do those check runs again on plain paper or on pre-printed forms. And to also be able to do your 1099 processing. So when you set up your vendors in Sage Intacct, you'll indicate if they are a 1099 vendor. And then along the way, you'll hear and see some things around operational reporting and visibility. In fact, we're going to start with a couple of dashboards to give you an idea of the information that's available to your different teams. One thing that you should keep in mind is, even though this particular topic is not around reporting and visibility, the reporting that you see in Sage Intacct is made possible because of two things. One, because we have such a great reporting center, and we'll talk about that as we get into the solution. The reporting center has all of the reports that are there when you implement. So around 150 reports are there when you implement. 30 of those are financial reports, 120 are reports across the subsystem. So some of the reports that you would see in automation, specifically accounts payable reports, there are standard reports in AP, an AP ledger, an AP check report, or check register. You know, those are standard reports that we've already created for you, and you can execute and run them anytime. So those reports that are in the report center are there day one, and then this is also where you can create your own reports, create your own financial reports, create your own custom reports. Those reports are really what fuel these dashboards. That's the gas that makes them powerful, is the reporting and the graphs and the key performance indicators that you see on the dashboards. All of these dashboards have real-time, up-to-date information. All of these dashboards allow you to drill down to source transactions and combine financial and operational data together. When we get into the solution, I'll touch on several different dashboards. However, if you want to know more about reporting and visibility, there is, in fact, another recorded asset that you can take advantage of to learn more specifically about reporting. So let's take a closer look in Sage Intacct. And I've switched screens here, and a couple things, if this is your first time to look at Sage Intacct, let me just point out a few things that you see on the screen here. Lots of information, and again, you may not be familiar with what you're looking at. I've logged in as 3 different users today. The first user that you see here is the controller, and Emma is somewhat of a super user. She can go anywhere, do anything, so she's got access pretty much across the board. She's landed here today on a role-based dashboard, and she's pointed herself at the AP Manager dashboard. Now, normally, Emma would be looking at her controller dashboard, but because of our topic today, I've positioned her to look right at that AP Manager dashboard. I also would point out that in our talk today, you should remember that we are managing multiple entities. And also, for terminology purposes, entity is the same thing as company. So I'm managing 5 different entities. You see them here in the drop-down. And as the controller, I have permission to transact in all of those entities. However, I have also logged in today as an employee user. And let me point out the difference here. First of all, you see a different dashboard. This is Nikki. Nikki is our employee user. And you can see that her dashboard is very different. So that tells you that you can have different types of dashboards. We call them role-based dashboards because typically you're seeing what's important to that person in that role. It also saves time because I can tag anyone that is an employee to this one dashboard. Now, certainly they're only going to see their information, but it enables me to create one dashboard for employees and roll it out to anyone who is attached to that specific role. I've also logged in as the CFO, which is Tom, and Tom as well has a different dashboard. What's important to him is not quite the same as what's important to Nikki. And again, what's important to Emma might not be important to Tom. So these are some different views of dashboards, so you get the idea that everyone gets to design and define them however they choose to use them. I also would just tell you that a little bit of the user experience, very easy for you to move around, so you can come into an application, you can see the task activities and reports, you can choose any of these things, and it will take you right into the software. Another way to navigate is through those role-based overview maps, and this is the one for accounts payable. So now you see the icons of a best business practice: enter a bill, pay a bill, approve payments, and print a check. So this is another way for you to navigate just by clicking on the icon. The third way to navigate is through the bookmarks, and this allows you to save a page, bookmark it if you will, and create your own personal menu. And this, in fact, is probably the easiest and fastest way to navigate once you are familiar with the solution. So let's come back to dashboards, and you'll notice here there are several different dashboards. I stopped at the AP Manager dashboard. I would also point to a Department Manager dashboard. We'll take a look at that one as well, because for some of you, you may have department managers that you are asking them to keep track of what's going on in their department. You're giving them a departmental budget, and so you want them to have a dashboard that reflects the information that's important to them. But let's come back to the AP Manager dashboard for just a moment. And these 3 boxes at the top are what we call key performance indicators, performance cards, if you will. And this is information that allows me to drill into this information, to look at it, to compare it to previous months, and to have a visual indicator. On this AP Manager dashboard, I've got a couple of graphs. So I've got the aging being shown here in a pie chart, and I've also got the AP trend. And then I've taken some standard listings here of my vendors, of my bills, my posted payments, and this information is just coming right to my dashboard. So these reports can be viewed immediately from the dashboard. I can take a list of this information. I can drill into any of those vendors so I can get right to their information. And that gives me the ability, without having to log in, log out, I can look at the information about my specific vendors. Now, one of the things with this multi-entity environment that I'm using today, this management of these 5 entities, I can set up a shared and common vendor master, which I have done. And I've also categorized or given my vendors a type. So this allows me to do some specific reporting based on vendor type. If I set up a vendor and I want to restrict that vendor, perhaps this is, pretend that this was Office Depot and all of my different entities can buy from Office Depot except one. One of my entities I do not permit to order from Office Depot for some reason. Perhaps their shipping is too expensive to the location. I can then go into the restrictions area and I can restrict that vendor to specific locations and or departments. And that will allow me to do 2 things. One, it allows me to set up that one vendor master. Only need to create one master for each one of my vendors instead of creating one for each entity that I am doing business in. And the second reason is because it allows me to control who gets access to buy from a particular vendor with this restrictions tab. So just a little background on, some of the things that you might see and want on your dashboard if you were the AP manager. If you were the department manager, you might want some different information. And again, I mentioned that maybe you might be that department manager that has a budget, and perhaps you're wanting to look at budget information so that you can see exactly how you're trending between actual versus budget in a particular area, in this case, professional fees. You might also want to see a little bit more of a detailed report here. This is a report across the Department of Billing and Administration to be able to see the actual versus the budget, and to be able to see and highlight anything that looks out of the ordinary. We can drill into this information, so we can drill right into the source transaction, and we can see that this $10,000 came from a couple of bills that came through our AP system. So these were AP bills that were posted to the AP journal. We can drill into those transactions. We can provide this information just as if it were an electronic filing cabinet. Normally you'd get up and get in the files to find this information. Here you can see this invoice. You're down at the source level. You can see any of the attachments that are with this transaction. And you can also see how this transaction was coded, how it was tagged to what we call dimensions. Dimensions being tags like department and location, as you see here. We have 11 predefined dimensions in Sage Intacct. Department and location are 2 of those. This allows us to come back and create our reports by any of those dimensions. Allows us to get to that granular reporting that everyone wants to see. This particular bill, this particular AP bill to Cambridge or from Cambridge Medical, was one that had to go through an approval process. So from here, I can drill into the approval history, and I can see that this was a transaction that was approved and when it was approved. So all of this information right at my fingertips, and remember, I got to that from a report on my dashboard. I can also look at my transactions, actual versus budget by location. So if I come in and execute this report, I have the ability to say, I only want to see this report for one of my locations. And so by doing that, I now can filter and I can see that this is just for Accord Health. So just for one of my entities. And again, I'm using the ability of looking at the data, looking at not only this month and last month, but I'm looking at a full quarter's worth of information here. So I'm looking at October, November, December. I'm looking at actual versus budget. I'm seeing the difference both in dollar amounts and in percentage. And I'm flagging things in red that probably need some of my attention. So again, anything in blue, I have the ability to hyperlink and drill into the detail. As we come back to our dashboards, there are other dashboards here that you may be interested in looking at from a cost perspective and controlling spend. That end result may be around more of an operations take. So when you think about some organizations, and you may be an organization that does this, sometimes there are supplies and equipment that you are buying and you're turning around and selling that equipment. Think of medical supplies. Think of things like canes or shower chairs, those types of things that you might be buying. You might be putting them into your warehouse, and then you might be selling them to your residents or to your patients. So that takes on another type of management, and that can be done through utilizing our inventory control application and combining that with purchasing and accounts payable. Some items you buy and you don't keep a perpetual inventory on. They're things that you consume, things that you use within your day-to-day facilities. Other things like these medical supplies that you are buying and selling would be things that you would want to keep a perpetual inventory on. So for that, we have a whole operations type dashboard here. These are the things that I have bought. I've bought them through entering a purchase order and receiving it in, and that's placed it into my inventory. And then I've turned around and sold it to an individual. And so now I have a sales invoice where I'm relieving that from inventory and billing my patient or my resident. So now you can see some of those items that I refer to. This is an inventory control journal. Again, some of the reports that you would want from an operational standpoint take on more of a purchasing sales analysis type of view. Maybe it's even around if you are shipping this to someone and you want to show a shipping history, or you want to look at your receipt history for when you brought these items into your warehouse. So being able to have both non-inventory and inventory items to capture those transactions and make sure that everything is getting automated and getting costed properly is part of what you'll do within this operations area. So now let's do this. Let's take a look at what we would do on a day-to-day basis from entering transactions for those purchasing things that we want to buy. So let's come over here to our employee, Nikki, for just a moment, and let's take a look within Nikki's area. Nikki has the ability to enter a purchase requisition. So let's kind of walk through that process and see how that would work. Nikki's in one of our other facilities, so she's only able to transact in Accord Health, so that's part of her permissioning. And for time purposes, I've entered a purchase requisition here, and I've saved it as a draft. So here at the draft level, I have a requisition, a Cambridge medical supply, and I'm asking for some disinfectant wipes to be ordered. And I can go ahead and enter that information as to how many I want and the price. And once I'm ready to go ahead and submit this, submitting this will kick off the workflow. And the workflow has now submitted this requisition for approval. It's sent it to the person or persons that need to get it approved. So let's come back to our controller, Emma, and let's look at the workflow approval that she has been sent for this particular requisition. So now what we see is Emma has received this requisition, and it's for her to view and either approve or decline. So as she looks at it, she can see a little bit of information. She can also view the attachment to see exactly what it is that Nikki wants to order. And she can see that it's for those disinfectant wipes. And she can see that it's been tagged to a location of Accord Health and to a specific department. At this point, Emma can either approve or decline this. We're going to go ahead and approve it. And once we approve it, Nikki will get a message letting her know that her requisition has been approved. Now we're going to put on our purchasing hat, and in purchasing, we're going to have a requisition that's ready to move to the next step. So as part of our workflow process, we're going to take a requisition that's been approved and we're going to convert it to a purchase order. And here's where the automation comes in. We're going to take everything from the requisition, drop it into this purchase order format so that no information needs to be rekeyed. Everything is here, including the attachment with the picture. We'll go ahead and get that posted. Once we post that, we'll send that out to our supplier. They'll then fulfill that and send us a vendor invoice. So our wipes will be in our facility along with our vendor invoice. When we get that invoice, we're going to validate that we got billed correctly, and we're going to enter a vendor invoice number. Once we post that, we now have gone from requisition to approval to purchase order to vendor invoice. And at this point, we can then look at all the information of that process here in our history tab. So what you're looking at here is the history of this business flow. It started as a requisition, went to a purchase order, and then a vendor invoice. In between these two steps, don't forget that we went through that workflow approval. Now, the question is, do you start with a requisition or do you start with a purchase order? You can start either way, and you can apply that workflow approval at either step or at both. It's up to you how you want to utilize the workflow approval. Every transaction is tracked in an audit trail, and in this case, you can also see the date, the time, and the user that entered this transaction. So think about this for a moment. If you were talking to your supplier, in this case Cambridge, and they had a question, you could come right to this history tab and you could drill into the detail and answer their questions. If you were talking to Nikki and Nikki had a question about the transaction, you could again come to this history tab and have all that information in front of you. This literally becomes your electronic filing cabinet. And when this transaction is paid, you'll have the ability to look at the payment details. So that's the drill down, the history, the documenting of that flow. Now, let's take a look at another situation. Let's look at a transaction that has had spend management placed on top of it. So at this point, if we look at our transactions and we look at what has been entered across as something that we want to have spend management applied to, let's start with our accounts payable. And let's come into our accounts payable screen and let's look at a transaction that is going to impact our spend management. And let's go ahead and enter that transaction so you can see the entry screen of entering an AP bill that you want to go through that approval process. We'll enter this to American Express today. You'll see that there's some information that automatically comes up. We'll also change this to our office supply account. And when we do that, we will then see our spend management because we have our office supplies in our budget specifically for $2,500. So let's enter our bill for $560. Let's tag it to a specific department and a specific location. And now let's look at the Spend Insight. So clicking on the Spend Insight window, we can see that our budget for our office supplies for Accord and our 300 department are $2,500. We've already spent $19.98, and this purchase of $560 is going to throw us into a situation where we don't have enough money. So it's showing us the funds are not available. Now, at this point, we can drill into that budget, so we can see that $2,500 here. We can see it on the budget report. We also can drill into this $19.98, which gives us that view of how did we get to this point, where have we spent the money already, and that will allow us to maybe make a decision on what we want to do. Now, the way that I have configured this is when I get ready to submit this, it will tell me that I am going to be over my budget. I can configure this so that it would stop me at this point and I wouldn't be able to go any further because I don't have the funds available. Or I can configure it so that it gives me a warning. So based on configuration, that's how Spend Insight will either warn or hard stop when you are not able to make that purchase. So putting spend management on top of either an AP transaction or a purchasing transaction is a way for you to help control spend. Now let's come back and let's take a quick look at a few reports that we have both in accounts payable and in purchasing. So one of the reports that I mentioned was the AP ledger. And again, if you're trying to manage accounts payable across multiple facilities, multiple entities in Intacct speak, you might want to look at this AP ledger based on certain vendors. You may want to look at it based on certain locations. So again, being able to look at it in a very broad sense or look at it filtered down to a specific entity is something that you have the capabilities of doing. And you can execute these reports right to the screen. You can also print them. You can push them out to your dashboard. You can even take the information to Excel. If we come back and we take out our specific location, then it's going to run across all of our entities, all of our locations. So now you have a larger report here because it's running across all of the different entities. This is a standard report in AP. All of these reports here are standard reports, ones that we've created for you. In addition to that, if you're using purchasing, there are a host of standard purchasing reports as well. And again, when you look at these reports, you have the ability to filter these reports the same way by those same dimensions. So controlling spend and managing can be done through accounts payable. It can be done through a formal procure to pay process, which incorporates our purchasing and inventory applications And all of these reports can be pushed out to your various dashboards. So let's come back to our PowerPoint now. And let's talk a little bit about resources. This is one of 3 recorded assets for the healthcare vertical. The other 2 are visibility and integration, security, and compliance. If you have not listened to those assets, I would encourage you to do so. They are complementary in nature. If you need more information or would like to know more about Sage Intacct, I would encourage you to visit our website. On our website, you can find additional assets, including customer testimonials. You can also sign up for product tours and review product data sheets. And of course, we love to hear from you. So here is our phone number at the bottom of this screen, and we encourage you to contact us with any questions that you might have. Just as a quick reminder, controlling spend is a top requirement, top of list for every type of organization. As you are looking at ways to perhaps revisit the processes that you have in your facilities today, I would encourage you to look at the different ways that you can utilize workflow to get those purchases, those transactions approved before they are ever sent out to your vendor, and to have that visibility via the role-based dashboards to know exactly where you are spending your dollars. Thank you so much. Bye now.